Today's daf is daf Pei Tes, Amar Rava. So we start on the top of Pei Tes, and Rava had said that there was a certain schar that was given to the descendants of Avram Avinu for saying, Imichut v'yatzroch nal. So Avram Avinu greets the king of stone, and he says, I don't want any benefit from you. I'm not going to pay you back for anything my Na'arim stole from you and ate, from consumption. But on the other hand, I don't want any gifts from you. And the emphasis here is on chut, a thread, and srochnal is the lace. Zachu banav l'shtei mitzvos. What two mitzvahs correspond to chut and srochnal? Chut shel tcheles and ritzua shel tefillin. Because the ritzua shel tefillin is similar to a srochnal in that it's made of leather. So the Gemara says the following: I understand the great gift of ritzua shel tefillin because as a result of tefillin, ksivu ro kol amei aretz ki shem Hashem nikra lecha v'sanya Rabbi Lezer Agadol Omer elu tefillin shel rosh. So when the nations of the world perceive our wearing of tefillin shel rosh, then it says v'yaru mimeka, they will stand in awe of you. So that's a great gift of tefillin shel rosh. Elachut shel tcheles maihi. What kind of benefit do I get from the tcheles? And where it says the Sanya, we learned in a brayso, Rabbi Meir Omer, manish tana tcheles mikol atzivon. Why did the Torah choose this color of tcheles? What distinguishes that color from any other color? Tcheles reminds us of the sea. Yam domel rakia, and the sea reminds us of the sky. Rakia domel even sapir. The even sapir domel kisei hakavod. So the color of the sky is similar to a sapphire stone. Now, it's a little bit difficult that Reb Meir goes through this entire Chad here, step by step. I mean, why not just go straight to the fact that the color of tchelis is similar to the sapphire stone, which is part of the kisei hakavod, and that's going to engender within us v'yiru es halokei Yisrael v'tachas raglov, and that'll engender in us a fear of God, because the kisei hakavod is tachas raglov, and it's a sapphire brickwork. But apparently, the similarity between a sapphire stone and the color of tchelis is not exact. You need that the blue of the tchelis be similar to the blue of the sea, which in turn is similar to the sky, which in turn is similar to the sapphire of the stone. Others say that Rabbi Meir mentions tcheles to the sea in order to allude a person to the miracle of the splitting of the sea. Also, the similarity between tcheles and the sky reminds us of the seven rakim, the seven heavens, that God sort of tipped over and inclined when he descended upon Har Sinai to give the Torah. And the similarity of the tcheles to the sapphire stone has something to do with the luchos, which are made of sapphire. So in other words, when one gazes at the tcheles, he remembers all these different things. He remembers the miracle of Kriyas Yamsuf. He remembers that Hashem came down at Har Sinai and that he gave us the two luchos habris. And these are all the similarities of the different stages here, where we start with the blue of the Tchelis, and then we go to the Rikia, and first to the Yam, and then to the Rikia, and then finally to the Avanas Sapir that reminds to the Kisei HaKol. Uksiv Kemara Even Sapir Dmus Kisei. So the sapphire color has a resemblance to the Kisei HaKavod, the throne of glory. And when God gazes upon his throne in glory, he's reminded of the Jews who perform the mitzvah of tzitzis. And that is a tremendous benefit that we get, because when Hashem sees that we perform the mitzvah of tzitzis, tzitzis is keneged kulam. It's the equivalent of all the different mitzvahs. And then Hashem will remember us for good, for bracha, for protection against our enemies, and so forth and so on. Now, keep in mind that we spoke about Avram's refusal to accept even a thread, a shoe strap from Melech Sdom. But yet, as we said before, Avram Avinu completely disconnected from the food stuff that his Na'arim had consumed. And Avram paid no compensation for that. Omar Rabbi Abba, Kosher Gezel Anechal, Shafilu Tzadikim Gmurim, this is an allusion to Avram Avinu, Einam Yecholim Lachzira. Once the Gazlan has consumed that which he stole, then he can never really restore it. He can never really be Mekayim fully the mitzvah of Hashavas HaGzela, because the Gzela, the object, is totally consumed. Again, he'll be obligated in compensation, but that's not the real McCoy mitzvah of Hashavas HaGzela. So the Gazlan is now faced with a very difficult situation. He can't really do tshuva and rectify his sin and return the object, because the object was consumed. And that's what we see in the parsha of Avram Avinu with Sdom, Shenemar Biladai. Biladai means far from me. Asher ochlu, rak asher ochlu ha'na'orim. In other words, I'm not going to take anything from you, and the only thing that's far from me, meaning which I cannot replace, is that which my Na'arim, my young people in part of my entourage, have consumed. So on the one hand, Avram Avinu refuses to receive any gifts, any benefits from Melech Sdom. But on the other hand, Avram concedes that he cannot return the booty that was already consumed by the Na'arim who accompanied him to battle. Now, technically, that booty belongs to Avram, according to the strict letter of the law. Anything that you win in battle becomes yours. Once the defeated army, in this case Sdom, abandons that which they abandoned. So that's considered as if the king of Sdom had relinquished ownership on all that which was abandoned. So on the one hand, Avram Avinu is not willing to profit from any loss of Sdom, and he would not take anything from Sdom. And if he would benefit from Sdom, he would consider it as if he was stealing from Sdom. But nevertheless, he would not return that which was consumed. And not only that, he didn't even offer to pay for that which the Na'arim had already eaten. So even the great tzaddik of Avram, whose righteousness is so immense and so great, nevertheless, although he would consider any gift that he got from Sdom as theft, but nevertheless, that which was already consumed, he would not return. He he did not compensate. So we see that even a great tzaddik has a challenge with gezel that was consumed. Kosher gezel hanechal, consumed gezel. Because again, anything that he took from stone, he considered it as gezel, even though legally it was his. Omer Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon Kol Mokum Shata Motzi Dover Shel Rabbi Elazar B'nosha Rabbi Yosef Glila Gada Asei Oznecha Ke'afar Keses. Anything that you hear from Rabbi Elazar or Rabbi Shimon in Divrei Agadita, make your ears open. Listen very carefully. The word Afar Keses is called in English a mill hopper. It's a large funnel through which the grain is channeled to the grinding area of a mill. So that large funnel is symbolically being used to describe the ears when you make your ears open like that funnel in order to hear clearly what Rabbi Elazar expounds in Divrei Agad. And this is what I want to tell you, says Rabbi Yochanan, in the name of Rabbi Elazar. Lo mirubchem mikol ha'amim chashek Hashem bachem. The Torah says, I didn't choose the Jewish people. There's a pasuk in Dvarim Daf Zayin, Perek Zayin, we'll get into it next week, that I didn't desire the people of Israel because of their great numbers. And I think the end of the pasuk, which is not quoted here, let's see if it's in the Torah, or is ki atem hama'atem michol ha'amim. Yeah, I was right. Now, on one level, we understand the pasuk to mean the numbers of Israel. Similarly, kipshuto. You take a population census and you figure out the number of Bnei Yisrael. But according to Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon, there's an allusion here as to why God chooses the Jewish people. And that is because they make themselves humble. Ki atem ma'at mikol ha'amim means they consider themselves ma'at. Amol lahem HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yisrael, choshchani b'cha, why do I desire you as my people? Shafilu b'shoshani mashpia lachem gedula. All the nations of the world, when they get greatness, they become so full of themselves. They consider themselves only almost like a deity, as we'll soon see. But in the case of Klal Yisrael, even when they reach greatness, you humble yourself. Nasati Gedul Avram, and we'll see this over and over again through the Israelite greats. I gave greatness to Avram. He was granted fabulous wealth, recognized as the leader of nations. And yet, Amar Lefanai Anochi Ofar Vefer. Avram considers himself like the earth and like the ashes. LeMoshe v'Aaron Amru, Moshe and Aaron were granted greatness, and yet they declared, Nachnu Ma, what are we? We're Ma. Ma means nothing. That's even a greater level of humility than that of Avram. Avram at least compared himself to something. LeDavid Amar, David achieves greatness, and yet he declares, Anochi tolas v'lo ish, I'm like a worm and not like man. Aval ovdei kochavim, just the opposite, enokain. And now we go through a little bit of the history of the greats amongst the goyim. Nasati gdula l'Nimrod. Nimrod was like a state religion. And Omar, what does he declare? Hava nivna lanu ir. We're going to build a tower, and we're going to challenge God in the heavens. Leparo Omar mi Hashem. Paro declares, who is Hashem? I don't recognize him. L'sancherev Omar mi b'chol elhei ha'aratzos. Let's read the whole pasuk. Mi b'chol Elohei harotzos asher hitzilu es artza miyodam, ki atzil Hashem es Yushalayim miyodi. No, it's God is the great God, and yet He's not gonna take away Yushalayim. I'm gonna conquer Yushalayim, meaning I'm greater than God. Nebuchadnezzar Amar Ela al Boma of. God grants greatness to Nebuchadnezzar Melech Bavel. He rules over the entire civilized world, and he declares, I will ascend over the top of the clouds. In other words, I'm likening myself to the Most High. Lechira Melech Tzur, I granted greatness to Hiram, the king of Tzur. And he declares, Moshe Elohim Yashavti Belev Yamim. I occupy the seat of God in the heart of the seas. So Bnei Yisrael humble themselves in front of God, even though they are granted greatness. But the idolaters become haughty and they're full of themselves and they consider themselves like God. And this is the virtue, according to the Agadita of Rabbi Eliezer Reb Shimon, that explains why God chose the people of Israel. Omar Rava v'Teimer Rabbi Yochanan, Gadol Shenemar, Moshe and Aaron reach a level of humility that exceeds even beyond that of Avram. V'inu Yosem Shenemar Avram, Tilu b'Avram ksiv Anochi Ofar ve'Efer, comparing themselves to something that exists in this world. Ve'ilu Moshe v'Aaron ksiv v'Nachnu Ma, we're nothing. Not even to compare ourselves to ashes and earth, which have some substance. The Omar Ravi Tamer Rabbi Yochanan Ein Olam Iskayim El B'Shvil Moshe v'Aaron. The world continues to exist on account of the humility of Moshe v'Aaron. Ksiv Hacha v'Nachnu Ma u'Ksiv Hasam Tola Eretz Al Blima. Pasuk in Eov. God allows the earth to exist in the merit of those who consider themselves as nothing. I'm trying to remember why we recite this pasuk on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. Yeah, I think on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur we're just meaning the simple pshat of the pasuk, not the drush, that God suspends the earth upon nothingness. Omer Rabbi Lo, Ein Olam is kaimel b'shvil mishe bolem. Es atz bolem means he holds back his mouth. B'shas mariva. No, he's at a point of provocation. Somebody provokes him, and he should really lash out back at them, but yet he muzzles himself. And the world exists by virtue of this person who's able to muzzle himself and not respond and not lash out back. Shenever told Eretz al blima, and again the word blima means to hold back your mouth, to muzzle your mouth. And I think it says, I'm not sure where, that if a person is insulted and he doesn't respond, then get a bracha from him at that time, because the whole world exists in merit of such a person who does not respond and react to provocation. Rabbi Avo Omar, Misha Mesim Atzmo Kimisha Eno, that this pasuk of Tola Eretz Al Blima, which explains why and how the world is justified and exists, is referring to the merit of someone who renders himself as he's non-existent. Shenemar umitachas zroos olam, which is a pasuk in Dvarim Perek Lamed Gimel. And the word mitachas means below. Below means he allows himself to be downtrodden. And zroos olam means the arms that hold up the world, like Hercules, holding up the world. Om Rabbi Yitzchak, my dichsiv. What's the meaning of the pasuk in Tehillim. What does it say in Tehillim? Ha'umnam elim. Elim is a mute. Tzedek tidaberun meisharim tishpetu b'nei adam. Is there mute or silence? Righteousness, should you speak? With equity, you judge people. And this pasuk is interpreted to mean the following: Ha'umnam elem. Umnam is a vocation, and umnus. Elem is muteness. Ma umnasu shel adam b'olam hazeh. What could be the greatest vocation a man could achieve in this world? If Yasim Atzmo Ke'ilen, he makes himself silent. Now, you might think, says Rabbi Yitzchak, that this pasuk goes as far as to say Yechal Af B'Divrei Torah. Maybe in Divrei Torah also, you should be very careful and be like an Elam and hold back from speech and limit and discipline your speech. Talmud Lomer Tzedek Tidaber. Tzedek is reference to the Torah. Tidaber means you should speak. But Yogiz, Daiti might think that, well, you know what? If I study Torah, then maybe I'm great. And he becomes prideful. Talmud Lomer Meisharim, the end of the pasuk says, with equity, tishbetu b'nei adam. You should judge people with equity. Equity meaning levelness. Consider yourself humble on the level parallel to the land that's trodden on. Omar Zeiri Vitema Rabba Bar Yirmiyah. By the way, I'm learning Hilchos Talmud Torah, and sometimes it fascinates me when I learn a Gemara about Talmud Torah and I don't find it anywhere in the Rambam, as if to say the Rambam omitted it. And the Gemara says in more than one place in Shas, I think we learned it together, that a person should teach his Talmidim b'lashon ktsara. He should be very, very chosen about his words, meaning limit his words. And the Rambam doesn't have it in Hilchos Talmud Torah. In Hilchos Deos, when he deals with Midos, he speaks about, all such situations in which we should be very careful and not, abuse our language and not use too many words. And the Rebbe should be careful about the words he chooses. But in Hilchos Talmud Torah, he omits it. And I was thinking, this is the thought that occurred to me when I prepared today's daf, that maybe the Rambam omitted it because of this statement of Rabbi Yitzchak, that although you should be very careful, make yourself mute when it comes to, responding and reacting to people who insult you, but with regard to Torah, tzedek tidaberun. Tidaber means speak. Don't hold back on your words. Now we get back to Kisi Adam. After all this Haggadah, and now we're going to study the question of whether or not dust, which is Asur Bana, is valid or disqualified for Kisi Adam. Now, in the case of Ir Anidachas, where most of the city was found guilty of worshiping idols, then the city is called an Ir Anidachas. You need a Sanhedrin Agdol, the greatest Sanhedrin of 71 elders, to declare that this is an Ir Anidachas. And there are two punishments to the Ir Anidachas. One is that first we go one by one and we find who is guilty of idolatry, and they get sayev. Then the buildings of the Ir Anidachas and all the property of the residents of the Ir Anidachas become Asur Bana, and they have to be destroyed by fire. And now you've got the Afar from the burning of an Ir Anidachas, and Reb Zera says you can use that for Kisi Adam. even though it's Asur B'Hana. V'amai Isuri Hanahu. After all, if you're going to use that offer from the Erni Dachas for Kisi Adam, you're benefiting from the offer, and you're not allowed to benefit from the offer of Kisi of Erni Dachas. So the Gemara now is going to go in two different directions. We start with Ze'iri. Omer Ze'iri lo nitzcha el afara. You're absolutely right. When um, when Ze'ira, again, you have to differentiate between Ze'ira and Ze'iri. When Ze'ira said, or some say it was Rabbah, that you could do Kisi Adam with the offer, he wasn't referring to the actual offer of the Erni Dachas, but rather Lafar Ofra, meaning underneath the offer, after you burn the Erni Dachas, is the earth, the ground of the earth. And how do I know such a thing? Says Ze'iri, Tichsiv, because with regard to the Ir Hanidachas, the pasuk says in Dvarim Perkid Gimel, Ve'es kol shlala tikbots el toch rechava v'sarafta. So the Torah designates, number one, kibbutz. Kibbutz means that we have to gather together all of the possessions of the residents of the Erni Dachas. And then, after kibbutz, it says v'sarafta, then you burn it. What does that teach us? That teaches us that this requirement of sreifa, which is predicated and generated by the Isur Hana, is only eno mechusa kfitza usreifa, only those properties which simply need to be gathered together and then burnt on the spot. But yotza zeh, but the earth below the city, meaning the city is sitting on earth, is mechusa tlisha kvitza usreifa. You'd have to add another pu'ula, another action of tlisha. You can now detach it from the ground. Then after you detach it from the ground, you gather it together and then you burn it. That's not included in the mitzvah of sreifa, and therefore, ipso facto, it's not included in the Isur Hana. But basically, what we have here, according to Ze'iri's interpretation, is what I call an ukimta, that the only offer that you're allowed to use for Kisi Adam from the Erni Dachas is only that offer which is not included in the mitzvah sreifa of Erni Dachas. It's offer de afara. Rava says the whole problem doesn't exist. I don't need Rav Ze'iri's ukimta to say that you're only allowed to cover the dam with the offer of the afara. No, it could be even the offer, even the ashes of the burning you could use. Why? Because we have a principle called mitzvah lav lehenos nitnu, that when the Torah prohibits hana, or for example, let's say I could take a neder in which I prohibit you from getting any hana from my objects. If you're taking my lulav for the sake of the mitzvah, then you don't violate the Isur of hana, because the Isur hana doesn't apply to mitzvahs. Because mitzvahs lav lehenos, when you do a mitzvah, you're not doing it for your benefit. You're doing it because God commanded you. So therefore, Rava says when you take the offer of the Erni Dachas, mamish the ashes, and you use it for Kisi Adam, you're not benefiting according to the legal halachic definition of benefiting, because you're doing it for the purpose of the mitzvah. Yosef Ravinu v'kamalei l'shmaita esvei Rav Ruchumi l'Ravinu. We're going to ask a kasha on Rava's principle of mitzvahs lav lehenos nitnu from a brisa called Shofar Shel Avodas Kochavim. Imagine if the idol worshippers use this shofar as part of their idolatry. It was what's called Tashmishi Avodah Zarah. Some say maybe they even worshipped the ram's horn itself, or it came from a ram that they worshipped. Lo yiskabo. Do not blow shofar on Rosh Hashanah with that shofar of Avodas Kochavim. Himai lavim takalo yotza, which sounds like that you completely nullify the mitzvah. Why? Because you're benefiting from Isuri Hana. Isuri Hana and Avodah Zarah, you're not allowed to benefit from it. Now, let's understand that there are two different dimensions to the halacha of lo yiskabo. One dimension of lo yiskabo is that it's mos. It's not proper to use an object that was used as part of idolatry for a mitzvah. The other aspect here is that you're benefiting from the shofar when you blow it because, and we're talking about avodah zarah, which is also by no. Lo. Therefore, Rava says, Im takabo yotza. The underlying reasoning of this brisa is not mitzvah slav lehenos, and you're violating the Isra no, and therefore that would negate the kiyum mitzvah of shofar, but rather we're talking about mos. Mos means it's despicable. It's an insult to the mitzvah that you're using a shofar that was used as part of idolatry. But if you went and you did so, okay, it's mos, but you fulfill the mitzvah. And as far as benefiting from Isuri Ano, Rava says that's not an issue because mitzvah slav lehenosnit. Frekti Gemara, what about this price? A lulav shalavodos kol chavim lo yitol. If the lulav was part of the idol worship, and not only that, it could be that the lulav was a palm tree and they worshipped a palm tree. That's typical of the idolaters to worship trees. And now you want to use that lulav from an asherah of avodah zarah for the benefit of the mitzvah of lulav. My lavim notalo yotza. So it's not because it's insulting to the mitzvah and repulsive to take something that was part of avodah zarah and use it for a mitzvah, but because you had benefit from avodah zarah, which is also by no lo, says Ravim notal yotza. And the only reason why the Brisa says lo yitol is because it would insult the mitzvah, and it's repugnant to use an avodah zarah lulav for the mitzvah of lulav. But Rav Rechumi says, "V'hatanya we have a Brisa says taka lo yotza, not a lo yotza." The Brisa is outspoken about the fact that if you used a shofar avodah zarah or a lulav of avodah zarah, you weren't yotzei. Why weren't you Yotze? According to Rava, mitzvos lav lehenos nitnu. And apparently the Gemara thinks the reason why you're not Yotze is because you had a violation of Isur Ano. But there's no violation of Isur Ano according to Rava in the case of a mitzvah. Rav Ashi, Hachi Hashta, Hasam, in the cases of shofar and lulav of Avodah Zarah. Now we're on Peites Amid Beis. The problem is that a shofar needs a shear. The shear of a shofar is that you could grab the shofar and it'll stick out on top and stick out on the bottom a little bit. The shear of a lulav is it's got to be 4 tvachim high. And vavodas kolcham kituse mechta shiura. We have a principle of kituse mechta shiura that when something is worshipped as avodah zarah, then you have to pulverize it. You have to be mechates it. And when you have a shear, that means it's got to be in existence. Now, even though right now the lulav is perfectly in existence, and the shofar, it's a beautiful shofar, beautiful lulav, but nevertheless the halacha says that it's considered as if it was pulverized, because that's what you have to do with it. And if it was pulverized, then there's no shear. But hacha, now we get to the case of kisi adam. Kol masha b'michtas malei l'kisuye. On the other hand, we had a long discussion about this yesterday, that what do you use for kisi adam? That which you pulverize, that which you grind into a powder. So grinding into a powder is not antithetical to the mitzvah of kisi adam. On the contrary, it sets up the mitzvah of kisi adam. Hadran alecha kisi adam. So we finished the 6th perek, Kisi Adam. Lovely perek. I think I'm going to teach this perek maybe to Leva Torah. Very good perek.